All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. I wish I could tell you that tonight's session is going to be a little less redneck than the other sessions that we've been through, but they are not. What we're going to see is some of the same bad choices passed down to another generation. Some people call it generational curses. I call it generational choices. And when I look at it, I see fathers and sons making the same choices. And it's sad because up to this point, what you're really seeing is the idea of passing faith along from one generation to the next. And it started with Abraham and Sarah. They were the first generation of believers for this group. And they had to change a lot about the way that they lived. God met them where they were, furthered the story in their life so that they would have a new and better view of God. And now they're passing that faith along to the next generation because at this point, Abraham and Sarah are both passed away. So now you have Isaac, his son, and Rebekah, and they're trying to live life together without any kind of influence from Abraham or Sarah, mom or dad, right? They're not getting any advice. They're not getting any wisdom. They're having to learn how to do this on their own. And every one of us, at some point, your faith really does become your own. You can't make it living on someone else's faith. And what is so bizarre to me, especially in the Isaac story, is that you don't get a lot about Isaac's life in the Bible. He is one of the major three characters of how Israel comes about, how Jesus comes onto the scene. Our God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But do you know not much is told to us about the life of Isaac? We know that God asked Abraham to offer his son Isaac. That was from Abraham's perspective more than it was Isaac's. We know that the servant of Abraham went and found a bride for Isaac. And that was less about Isaac and more about the servant. Now, for the first time, we get a glimpse into the life of Isaac. And it's going to remind us a lot of Abraham. Maybe that's why there's only a couple of chapters dedicated to the life of Isaac. But they're leading out. They're having to figure out, how do we do marriage? How do we do family? And for all of us, at some point in life, that has been the case for us, right? You had to learn how to do these things. And you had to learn how to walk before the Lord and walk with the Lord. The Bible says we work out our salvation with fear and trembling. There's things that we learn as we go. Some lessons are better than others. Some lessons are easier than others. Right? If you've been married 10 minutes, you should be saying yes, yes. Let's jump into this. Genesis 26, verse 1. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. And the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands. And I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." So Isaac settles in Gerar. So even though Isaac lived in the land that God promised to Abraham and to his descendants, it didn't mean it wasn't going to be without trouble or challenge. And just as it was in the days of Abraham, a famine hits. And just like Abraham, Isaac wants to go down south to Egypt because they are not suffering from the famine like they are up in Israel, and he wants to go where there's food. It seems logical, yes? But God speaks to Isaac and says, "Do not go down to Egypt. Don't go down there. Stay here. I will bless you. I will take care of you." And where does Isaac end up? Gerar. Do you know where Gerar is? As close to Egypt as you can possibly get without being in Egypt. He is down as far as he can get. He is what we would call straddling the fence, right? Let me get as close to the edge as I can possibly get. God told me not to step foot in that land, even though I can throw a rock there from here. I'm not in there, right? I'm not. It's like your kids in the back seat. I'm not touching him. I'm not touching him. Technically, that is true, but in your heart, I would have to imagine that, yes, you are already in Egypt. You're probably benefiting from the food that is Egypt's that's coming up through Gerar. Isaac goes down south, and he ends up in this border town, but it's not Egypt. It's as close as you can get, and he's dwelling right there on the edge, right there on the fence, so to speak. There was a story told one time, parable. A day came when all the believers were gathered together in one place. And God says, those that belong to the devil go on this side, those that belong to me go on this side. Well, people started going on one side of the fence and the other side of the fence. They were choosing allegiance. Well, there was this one guy that said, I'm not choosing allegiance. He sits on the fence. He climbs up and straddles it and just sits there. He has one leg on one side, one leg on the other side. Well, after a while, all the sides had been chosen, and the devil comes up and grabs the guy by the neck and pulls him off the fence. And the guy says, whoa, you can't do that. I did not choose a side. I was sitting on the fence. And the devil says, oh, you didn't know. I own the fence. And that's how it is for a lot of us. We want to get as close to the things that we're not supposed to be in or to be, but we don't understand the devil owns the fence. Don't toy around with sin. Don't play around with it. It's so dangerous, and God knows that. God doesn't forbid things because he wants to kill your joy. He knows the danger that comes with it. He knows the cost that's paid. The wages of sin is what, y'all? Death, absolutely. A lukewarm place is a difficult place to be. Lukewarm people feel as though they have and are something they're not. There was a preacher by the name of G. Campbell Morgan back in the 1800s, a revivalist, and this is what he said about being lukewarm. He said, there's more hope for the man outside of the church and all of his coldness than the man within the church who is near enough to its warmth to appreciate it, far enough from its burning heat to be useless to God and man. There is a greater chance for the non-believer who's not heard the gospel than the man who's become an evangelized non-believer. What G. Campbell Morgan was saying is you can have so much of the world that you don't enjoy God, but you've got just enough God that you don't enjoy the world, and you just stay in this miserable state. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now. It is going to stay that way. You see, to follow Christ means to put your hand to the plow and not look back. There's a reason for that. Once again, not to kill your joy, but because God knows the misery that it is when you try to live in two different worlds. Living in two worlds is an impossibility, and the devil owns the middle. So stay out of the middle ground. Yes? All right, look at verse 7. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, oh no, here we go. He said, she is my sister. Are you kidding me? I wonder where he learned that trick. His dad, Abraham, did this not once, but twice. Premeditated, lied, and for some reason, Isaac thinks this is a great idea too. She's my sister, for he feared to say my wife, thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and he saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. Now, I need to point this out. This is a very nice, clean translation. They're not laughing with each other. I'll give you no hints, but I'll let you guess. Sporting is what another version of the Bible would say. Knowing is another version. You get the idea, yes? Abimelech sees this. They're not telling jokes to each other. Verse 9. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, she is your wife. How then could you say she is my sister?" Good question. Isaac says to him, "Because I thought," the same thing Abraham said, right? That's your problem, you're thinking. "Lest I die because of her." Abimelech said, "What is this you've done to us? One of the people might have easily lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, "Whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." And Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. Wow. This is nothing more than the mercy of God, nothing more than the grace of God, because this man is the promised child. Promised to do what? Promised to pass on the generations of God, the descendants of Abraham who are going to become the people of God. But yet here we see he's ready to forfeit it, just like Abraham. All of this rings a bell, right? Famine in the land, go down to talk to Abimelech. This is a different Abimelech. This is the son of Abimelech, also named Abimelech. Not confusing at all, but it paints the picture, right? Same thing. She's not my wife. She's my sister. It's premeditated. He thinks he's going to die if they find out. Guys, you know this, some of you. I'm learning this as I go. My kids follow my lead. Half the time I don't think they're listening. The other half of the time they sound just like me and it makes me mad. But they follow our lead. They watch. If you remember, God told Isaac at the very beginning of this chapter, he said, "You're going to be blessed because your dad obeyed my voice. Your dad kept my charge and my commands, my statutes, my laws. I'm going to bless you." And I mentioned this earlier. I think a lot of pathological dysfunction happens not as spiritual punishment, not because of our ancestry, not even because of behavior, as much as it is things are caught more than they are taught in a family. They just are. Your kids are catching things from you. More than, if I try to sit down and teach them, they don't want to listen. Right? Am I the only one that thinks this? Okay, please, some of you with kids tell me this gets better. No, you're shaking your head no. Oh, man. That's right. The older I get, the smarter my parents begin to look, right? I can't say my personal struggles are due primarily to what my parents have done, because I have to make choices for me too, right? I have to make my own choices. As J. Vernon McGee, a great country preacher, once said, a tub's got to sit on its own 4 feet. And you and I, we are responsible for the things that we do. Because when it comes time for Judgment Day, God's not going to look at me and blame my parents. I'm the one that's going to have to answer. You're the one that's going to have to answer. And so, when does our participation in unhealthy familial patterns stop being the result of what some may say is a curse, and just say, man, you're making bad choices. Maybe you learned some bad things along the way. Right? I get it. But I've seen so many cases where people would say, you know what? I'm not responsible for the way I behave. I'm a drug addict because my grandma played with Ouija boards when she was a kid. I don't think those two things go together. Maybe they do. I mean, I'm just thinking you made some bad choices along the way. I'm thinking that maybe you brought some of this dysfunction into your own life, because when I look at my life and the struggles that I went through, it wasn't my parents' fault that I made the choices I made. In fact, they were dying to make me make different choices, if I remember correctly. And maybe you know the same thing in your own family, with your kids, and maybe your grandkids. So the best thing we can do, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, we lead by example, because more is caught than is ever taught. I need to understand that my choices affect me and my family. Therefore, I need to be mindful of the choices I make. Because the choices I make today, yes, it will affect my family for sure. I think probably more close to what we would call a generational curse is maybe a baby that's born addicted to cocaine because the mother did drugs. That seems more of me a generational curse than Mama drank and that's why I robbed banks. I don't, you know what I mean? I mean, I'm being light with it, but honestly, that's what it sounds like to me sometimes when people just don't want to take responsibility for their actions. So what we see in this father-son tandem is a lot of the same stuff. Look at this. Both Abraham and Isaac received God's promise. Yes. Both men lived in Gerar. Both men had lovely wives. Think about this for a second. When Sarah was being hit on for the second time, this lady's in her 90s. She's a stone cold fox. Look, 90 years old? Wow. Both Abraham and Isaac acted like cowards. Both lied about their wife and said they were, like, that's a better lie. Oh, she's my sister. That's better. Oh my. Both were spared the consequences of their sins by God's grace and God's mercy. And look at this. This always just stabs me to the heart. Both were rebuked by a more honorable unbeliever. Both Abimelechs. Why did you do this? You know this is wrong. Why would you put me in this position? And I got to say, I agree. Why would he? Why do I? Why do we? Why do we do the things we do? Man, sin is no joke. It's alive and well, and thank God that Jesus came to pay the price for sin. Or we're done for, right? Done for. Well, despite Isaac's belief that God would protect him and his wife, God blessed him, made him very wealthy. And despite attempts to destroy the financial blessings from God, God overcomes to prove that even if the blessing is delayed, it's not stopped. So Isaac continues to bless. Now, from this story, we're seeing that God is reminding Isaac of covenant promises. I promised Abraham this. You're Abraham's descendant, so that promise is for you too, and it's going to be for your kids too, on down the line. Look at verse 14. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are much mightier than we." So Isaac departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. And Isaac dug again the wells of water that had been dug in the days of Abraham his father, which the Philistines had stopped after the death of Abraham. And he gave them names that his father had given him. Isaac's prosperity was so great that people envied him for it. The Philistines that lived in the land said, "We're so envious of all that he has, we're going to stop up his wells of water." Now this is precious commodity, Middle East. Yes, they need water. The Philistines are stopping up these wells. And God keeps blessing him. And they keep stopping up the wells. It's expensive to dig. It's significant to attack somebody's water supply. But Isaac's not fighting back. God is defending him. God's watching out for him. And Isaac didn't want to continue in the battle, so when they say go away, he goes away. But guess what he finds? Another well. But who dug that well? His dad. All right, so now we're seeing the other side of the coin, right? The first time, we're seeing all the bad choices paying off in Isaac's life with more bad choices, but now we're seeing the good side of things. Now, nobody told us Abraham dug a well. I didn't even know he owned a shovel. Right? The Bible doesn't tell us anything about him digging wells, but yet here is Isaac finding a well that was dug by his father. And Isaac would have never found new wells had he not started digging where his father had previously dug. That should tell us something about legacy and next generation, y'all. Amen. We are to be those that are digging wells not just for ourselves, but for the next generation that will come along. Because we are leaving a spiritual and physical legacy for the next generation. And I have to stop and I have to ask myself, and I want you to ask yourself, how am I doing with that? How am I doing? Am I setting things up at Shearer Hills Baptist Church so that the next generation can walk in and be further ahead than we were when we started? That's what we're supposed to be doing. Where the previous generation leaves off, that's the starting point for the next generation. And man, I want the next generation of Shearer Hills believers to start way up because, man, we're giving them a head start. The next generation can only rise as high as the past generation is willing to lift them because that's where they start. That's why I put a big emphasis in my heart, multi-generational church. I love the fact that we've got families that are 4 generations deep here. I love that. Because what does that show me? There's already the taste of legacy in the air here. We should continue that, continue passing that along, generation to generation. Reminding ourselves of the past and having vision for the future can help us be renewed in the present. And that's what you see in the life of Isaac right here. The most that we know about Isaac, he lied about his wife and the brother dug wells. That's what we know about him. And do you know, if you really look into the life of Isaac, there's way more verses of Scripture about him and these wells than there ever was about him lying. I like that. Because in review, what God has done for us in the past, and if we'll remember that and anticipate what He'll do in the future, it gives us peace in the present to move forward. How can we know that we've left a spiritual legacy? We've done all that we can to lift the next generation. You know, I've preached this for a while, and I believe it's catching on, and I believe people are seeing this. Man, what we do is really not about us. It's not about me and you. It's about leaving that legacy. The work that we do now, yes, we benefit, we are blessed, and we are rah-rahing one another on. But really what we should be saying is, this is for the next generation. We need to set it up for them. Because if the Bible shows me anything, is that we're all one generation away from losing an entire spiritual heritage. So we need to do our part. Look at verse 19. When Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of spring water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water is ours. Okay, just to give you an idea of what's happening. Isaac finds a well. The Philistine says, that's not yours, it's ours. Go away. Okay. He finds another well. That's not yours, it's ours. Go away. Okay. And this is what we see happening more. He's getting bullied and moving along. So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also. And he called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, saying, for now the Lord has made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. Esek means contention. Sitnah means opposition. So he's digging these wells. People are fighting with him over them. He says, well, we're just going to call the name of this well contention. We're going to call the name of this one opposition. And finally, he digs a well nobody's fighting him for. Do you know why? Because he's moving out of the country that God told him not to go to in the first place. And now he's finding that there's no contention or quarrel as he moves into the promise of God. And he finally finds a well nobody's wanting to fight him over. And he says, whew, there's room here. And that's what he named the well. There's room here. And I found, and probably you too, your life is probably a series of Sitna and Essek until you find your Rehoboth. There's contention, there's opposition, but then you find there's room. I was thinking back on my ministry journey. It's a series of digging wells and moving on is really what it is. I looked at my ministry career started when I was recruited to be the fourth and fifth grade boys Sunday school teacher. Lord have mercy. Do you know why I got recruited? Because the woman doing it said, I can't do this anymore. They're driving me crazy. They're too wild. So I was brought in to be the sergeant at arms. Manhandled a couple of kids. I'm just joking. I didn't manhandle them. I wanted to. I got to a point where I earned their respect and trust. And then they would listen. And God taught me really quick that if you can learn how to teach a child, teaching adults is no problem. Child's attention span's that quick. So we had to do a lot of stuff. And the church that I was in said, would you be our children's minister? And I said, you know, I have been feeling a call to ministry. Can I try it out? They said yes. Big mistake there for them, because I tried it out 110%. What I did, I'd probably get arrested for today, because we had guys come in with like fake guns, like they were robbing the place, and we're like, no, you can't rob treasures in heaven. Great illustrations, just couldn't do them today, right? Great illustrations, just can't do them today. We run a bus route, and we would pick up kids, and I mean, I don't think one of us had a seatbelt on. We were just cramming kids in there as much as we could. We had car seats in there half the time, because if Big Brother's going to come, little sister's got to come too. And we would bring those kids, and we would bring them to church, and man, we did all kind of crazy stuff. One of my illustrated sermons was on Jezebel, and when they pushed her out of the window and the dogs licked up her blood, right? Let me tell you something with kids, the grosser you can get, the better it is. So what we did, I had a mannequin. Y'all just listen, it's good. So I had this mannequin, and one of the ladies was dressed up, and she had all the Jezebel garb on, and we had the mannequin dressed up like her too. And so she was sticking her head out of the side of the baptistry in the children's area where it was the old sanctuary of the church. And she would, I'm going to get you, Elijah, and blah, blah. You know, she was acting like the wicked witch. And then when it came time for the dogs to lick up her blood, some friends of mine had some hunting dogs. And we put peanut butter on the mannequin. And when it came time for them to push Jezebel out the window, the mannequin hit. They let the dogs go from the back, and those kids were like, "Oh!" It was the greatest thing ever. Like, can't do that today, but then it worked really well. And no, those kids will never forget that. There was another time that I don't even want to say it. Oh, I did a burnt offering one time in class. We had a little, it was a sheep it was nothing but cotton balls and cardboard, and it looked like a sheep. And we were talking about the burnt offerings, and I had like the little, they're not shot glasses. What are they? The communion cups is what they are. And and they had pure alcohol in them. And the kids, we were doing the Elijah story, right? So we act like they poured the 12 bottles of water over the offering, but I was pouring pure alcohol on there. And I was like, and then they prayed and fire came down from heaven. I was like, bow your head and pray. And I pulled out a lighter and lit that thing up, and it goes up. And those kids thought that was the greatest thing ever. Until they had parents like, did you perform a burnt offering in children? Yes, I did. Now, I could tell you so many stories from that time. I dug those wells until it was time to move on. And I moved on. I became an associate pastor at a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. And that was some great times because there was no pretense in that room. Everybody knew we were all messed up, right? Everybody knew. Everybody came from contention and opposition. Everybody had dysfunctional families, and we were able to relate to one another. Saw so many salvations happen. One I remember is we would take in like indigents and like halfway to jail people. Like when the jails were stuck, they'd bring them out here to the rehabilitation center. And we would hold them until a room opened up for them and they would come and get them. That's scary. But they were paying customers, so, here you go. And I was doing a Monday night Bible study, and there was a guy in the back. This guy, it was every bit of 7 foot tall. He was huge, a monster of a man. And he sat with a scowl on his face, and I was literally scared of this guy. I was scared. And I was preaching one Sunday, and we saw the wagon pull up that was going to take the halfways to the jail, and he was one of them. And when he saw them pull up, he stood up. I was like, oh man, what's about to happen here? Well, he didn't walk outside. He started walking down the aisle. And I'm preaching. And he gets closer and closer, and I'm thinking, oh man, I'm about to get hit. Something's about to go down. He gets to the front of the church. He looks at me and just drops to his knees and begins weeping. He accepted Christ. Had no idea that this guy was even listening to a word I was saying. I was scared to death of him. But he accepted Jesus that night. I don't know what happened to him after that. He was taken away and I never saw him again. But he accepted Jesus that night. When that well stopped up, we moved on. I became youth pastor in a church in the Mississippi Delta. That was a wild ride. Look, let me tell you this, the Mississippi Delta is another world. Another world. Might as well be on Mars when you're in the Mississippi Delta. Man, that was a great run at youth pastor because we did the same thing I did as children's pastor. We run a bus route, 30, 45 miles sometimes to pick up kids to bring them to church. Now in the Mississippi Delta, you need to know that the population of the Mississippi Delta is primarily black. And the people at our church didn't want black people at their church, and it broke my heart. And I said, that's unfair. Why would you do this? How can you call yourself a believer and have that kind of attitude? And I wept and I pleaded, and they just wouldn't listen. And they put a lock on the gym door and wouldn't let us in. And I resigned immediately. It was sour. Put a bad taste in my mouth. But that kind of mess does not fly with me. Does not at all. I thought that well was going to be stopped up permanently. And can I tell you, 3 days after that, praying, seeking God, what now? A church in Livingston, Alabama called me and said, we've heard some of your preaching when you come to our college and you did some stuff on campus. Would you be interested in a pastorate in Alabama? And I said, let me pray about it. Yes, I would. When you don't have a job, then that comes along. God has answered a prayer. And Alabama was so much fun. It was an older congregation, and man, we loved God, and we learned how to evangelize together. And ended up, man, we had a great church. It was a very diverse racially church, which was soothing to my heart after where I came from in the Mississippi Delta. And one of our members introduced me, well, actually it was my wife, because my wife was doing hair at the time, and one of the stylists next door to her, she was a pastor of a church. And she said, Brother Pastor, would you like to come and do a revival for us? And I said, I would love to do a revival. Where is it? It's going to be a tent revival in the Walmart parking lot. So I went and did it. She said, make sure you wear your best suit. It's July in Alabama. But I did. And I preached stuff I didn't even know I could preach, because that crowd kept me going. There was a little boy 10 years old on an organ while I was preaching. That was preaching to the rhythm of my preaching. I preached everything I knew 3 times. I just went after it. It was fantastic. Got on my heart really hard to plant a church, but we didn't know how to plant a church. Amber and I had no idea how to plant a church. But my brother was serving with a pastor down in Louisiana who says, hey, come down here, let me show you how to plant churches, and you can be one of our church plants. So we moved down there. Spot opened up. They needed a youth pastor. Guess who was there? God kept opening up these wells. Learned how to plant churches after about 3 years. Went and moved to Missouri where we planted a church. I found out that although I wanted to plant a church, I'm not a church planter. You got to be a hustler to be a church planter. You've got to have a lot of faith. You got to have crazy faith to be a church planter. I envy those guys. They have a swagger and a confidence and a crazy faith that I wish I could walk in. Ended up meeting some more folks that needed a pastor for their existing church. Moved there. All these wells keep opening up. That church blew up. It was like ants. Kids were running around everywhere. It was just people, and it was out in the middle of nowhere. It was out in the middle of a prairie. We had no advertising budget, zero evangelism budget, but yet God was sending people from all over to this little prairie, this 100-seat auditorium. Thank God it was springtime and summer, because we had to start setting people outside that would listen through the windows. There was just so many people. And we just kept loving God, and wells come to an end, because growth for some people is not growth for other people. You see, growth to this church meant just fill up our walls and we're good. It's too many people. I want to get it back to normal, some people told me. Broke my heart. But I get it. We should have defined our terms before we started. So Amber gets a job down in Granbury, Texas. My brother lived in Hudson Oaks. Weatherford was right in the middle. Let's split the difference. So we lived in Weatherford. And I thought, Texas, the opportunity that's going to be there, surely there's a church there that's looking for somebody. They didn't even want to look at me. Didn't want to look at my resume. No thank you. But you haven't had a pastor in years. No thank you. Wow, does the resume look that bad? Maybe I need to redo this thing. The church we were going to was a very large church, largest church I'd ever been in, attended. And the pastor there said, look, I'm going to help you find somewhere. And I said, please do, because we're rocking on 9 months of me not working. I finally go to work at this newspaper place called the Weatherford Democrat, and I'm stuffed. Oh, don't be fooled. That's a very conservative place, but the newspaper is called the Democrat. I'm stuffing newspapers into a machine that's sorting it out and putting ads into them. And I'm thinking, Lord, is this what it was supposed to come to? Standing here on an assembly line, putting ads in a newspaper, working graveyard shift. Yay, praise. That's how I felt. I was very upset. I didn't know what we were going to do, because making $7.75 an hour is not cutting it when you got a family. I worked 3 jobs those 9 months, not ministry jobs. I was a custodian at a school. I was a high school softball girls softball coach. We won 3rd place that year. And I worked at the Weatherford Democrat graveyard. I slept about 3 hours a night. And I was going to school. This is not pin a ribbon on my nose. I don't know how I made it besides God. Finally, the pastor at the church that we were at says, hey, I think God may want you here. Do you have any videos of your preaching? I said, I do. Sent it to him. He watched them. He says, look, I'm going to be out Labor Day weekend. Why don't you come and preach for me on Labor Day weekend? Love to. Let me pray about it. Yes. All right. Largest audience I'd ever preached to in my life. This is a church that was running 1,700 people. Largest one I've ever been in. And it was a great fit. It's a perfect fit. And he said, you know what, I think God may just want you here. So they hired me on to be their teaching pastor, and I was there for 9 years. But Wales come to an end. And can I tell you that although there's been contention, opposition, man, San Antonio is my Rehoboth. There's room. We can breathe. We can do ministry. Let's love God together. I love it. I love it because you can have anointing and calling and gifting and miss great opportunity because what if you give up after the first well, you get contention? What if you give up after that? Because I'm telling you, I wanted to throw in the towel so many times. Had it not been for my God-loving wife, I would have thrown in the towel long, long ago. And she said, keep on keeping on. Hang in there. Have faith. God's going to do something. I was like, well, he needs to do it because man, this is killing me. Hang in there. She prayed for me. She cried with me. Man, she kept me from throwing in the towel when there was strife and contention. And I know I went way off topic to tell you all of that, but just to give you a history ministerially of where I've been, it feels good when you find a Rehoboth. It feels good. Look, this is what I found out. God is not only preparing a place for you, but he's preparing you for a place. Guys, I love San Antonio. I love Shearer Hills Baptist Church. I love it. I love the fact that I know just about how many steps it takes to get from my office to the worship center. That's about 1/10 of a mile. That's a long way. And Ryan's got a scooter, and I said, no fair. Don't throw in the... I queued you up, and you rang the bell. Thank you. Oh, my. Look at verse 23. From there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I'm the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and I will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. So he built an altar there, and he called upon the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there, and Isaac's servants dug a well. You know what's so cool about this? Talking about following the legacy of a father. If you look back at Genesis 12, verses 7 and 8, just write it down or highlight it. Look what Abraham did when he moved away from Abimelech. He moved to the hill country east of Bethel, pitched his tent, and built an altar and called on the name of the Lord. You see, kids are going to follow because more is caught than taught, and I know they have their decisions to make, and I know they go their own ways, but man, let's do our part, right? Let's do our part. I'm just praying that they catch something, that they saw something in those tough years of contention and opposition that didn't push them away, that they saw something that maybe would make them hang in there when things get tough. Well, verse 26 says Abimelech went to him from Gerar with that guy, Ahuzzath, his advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his army. Isaac said to them, why have you come to see me, or why have you come to me, seeing that you hate me and you've sent me away from you? They said, we see plainly that the Lord has been with you. So we said, let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us. Let's make a covenant that you will do us no harm, just as we've not touched you, and we've done nothing but good, and we've sent you away in peace, minus all that stopping up the well thing. You are now the blessed of the Lord. So he made them a feast, and they ate and they drank, and in the morning they rose early, exchanged oaths, and Isaac sent them on their way, and they departed from him in peace. That same day Isaac's servants came to him and told him about the well that they had dug, and said to him, we have found water. And he called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of that city is Beersheba to this day. Now look at verse 34 here. It sets up the next chapter. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri, the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. So while Isaac's digging wells, Esau's taking wives.
Chapter 26.
That's right. That's exactly where it is. I'm hoping the camera catches all these things because they are right on the money. Look, Esau is taking wives that are not of the Hebrew people. And it's making life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. He's not traveling in a direction that's leading him towards God. He's traveling in a direction that's taking him away from God. Marrying outside of the Hebrew people, he knew that he was going to start serving other gods. That's the problem with this. Verse 1 of 27, real quick. You know this story. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim that he could not see, he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." Because he couldn't see, remember? I thought that was funny. He said, "Behold, I'm old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver, your bow. Go out to the field and hunt game for me. Prepare for me delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt game and to bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare it for me delicious food, that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock, bring me 2 good young goats, so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, that he may bless you before he dies." Now you know how this story goes, right? Just to give you a reminder, because we had a chapter in between. Esau, do you remember what Esau's name means? Hairy, yes. Baby Elmo when he's born, right? Covered in red hair. Jacob means heel snatcher, trickster, joker. So now we know, because God has spoken to Rebekah, which child is to be blessed. The younger shall serve over the older, right? The older is going to serve the younger. She knows which one's supposed to be blessed. So she hears Jacob, and apparently they've not talked about this, or either they're at odds because they had favorites, remember? And she hears Isaac in his old age and he can't see. He says, "Esau, go prepare me food. You know I love when you go hunt and you kill stuff and you prepare it. I love that. Go do that for me." Rebekah hears that and she says, "Jacob, go get some goats. I'm going to cook some food that your dad likes and he's going to bless you instead of Esau." Now, why would she do this? Why would she resort to this kind of deception? Why not just have a conversation with Isaac? That's right. He told everybody, "You're my sister." No. Rebekah's waiting for this to come to fruition. Everything probably in her is saying, "But God told me this is the one to be blessed. Jacob is the one to be blessed." But they were playing favorites. Dad loved Esau. Mom loved Jacob. They're not reasoning with each other. We talked about this last week. That's why there's so much dysfunction a lot of times, because instead of making these kids work stuff out, we take sides. And when that happens, mom becomes against dad. And we see this happen right here. And this whole part of this story is, once again, reminiscent of Abraham. Remember when they were going to have a child and Sarah had this great idea? "Why don't you take my handmaid? Let's mess up the plan." And here we have that again, involving theirself in the process to bring God's promise to fruition. Look at verse 11. Jacob says to Rebekah, his mother, "Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man." How hairy is he? Check this out. "And I am smooth." I'm a smooth man. Verse 12, perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. His mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go bring them to me. So he went and he took them and brought them to his mother, the goats, okay? And his mother prepared delicious food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, put them on Jacob, her younger son. Get this, how hairy is Esau? And the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. And she put the delicious food and the bread which she prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. Okay, I want to appreciate the fact of how hairy this man is, that goat skin would be the fooling factor, that you can't tell me apart from anybody else until you feel, and it's as the consistency, and as you will see, the smell of a goat. That's Esau. What are the chances? This is a harebrained scheme. If I was a Vegas odds maker, what is the over and under that he gets away with this, right? You're going into your blind father who has known you since you were born, and you're going to trick him into thinking the smooth man's the hairy man. Mama's boy is all of a sudden the hunter. What's the chances this is going to work out? What, 20%? Is that too high? Maybe like 5% chance that this actually works? And what makes it even worse is Rebekah says, Jacob says, it may appear that I'm mocking my father if I do this. Do you think? What if he curses me instead of blesses me? What'd mom say? Let the curse be on me. I'm not sure if they understand how this whole thing works. Right? Remember we talked about it when we started. They're figuring this whole thing out. This walking with God thing, they are figuring it out. But at this point in the story, Rebekah and Jacob, they're on the same page. I don't think they actually believe what they're doing is deceptive. I don't think they really believe that. I think that they believe what they're doing is what's necessary to get Jacob the blessing. And it's at all costs, whatever it takes. Verse 18. So he went into his father. And he says, he's dressed up like Esau. And he says, my father, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Jacob said to his father, I'm Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game that your soul may bless me. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you've found it so quickly, my son? He answered, because the Lord your God granted me success. I don't know if he's playing like Esau or not at that point. Then Isaac says to Jacob, please come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. Now, Jacob was really good at fooling dad on everything except what? The sound of his voice. Obviously, he doesn't have the testosterone that this brother's carrying around. So he's trying to fool dad, but dad knows better, or does he? Isaac was trusting what he could see. He was trusting what he could feel. He's trusting what he can smell. The only thing that he does not trust is the word that he heard. And I think for a lot of us, that is the same thing that happens to us. We'll look at our situations and we'll believe what we can see. We'll believe what others may say. But we're not trusting in the word of God that we know and hear. This is where Isaac falls short one more time. He doesn't believe the word he heard. He says it. Sounds like Jacob. Feels like Esau. Got to be Esau. He trusted what he could feel more than he trusted what he heard. Because what we see is not always what we get, right? Man, to trust in only what you see is dangerous because your eyes can't explain to you why you see what you see. Your eyes can't tell you motive. Your eyes can only tell you what's in front of you. It's dangerous. It's Wizard of Oz, right? I'm the great and mighty Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Because he was running the whole show. But what were they seeing? The great and powerful wizard. He trusted what he could feel. But just because something feels right doesn't mean that it is right. You ever had a gut feeling about something? You ever had that gut feeling be dead wrong? Yes, I have too, because you can't trust that. And what we think isn't always right because our thinking is so limited. And so all of this was for the blessing, the key component of the Hebrew life, the blessing, the passing on of the spiritual legacy, the spiritual heritage to the next generation, usually happened for the oldest kid. That's the way that it worked. But it wasn't working this way this time. Look at verse 24. Are you really my son Esau? He answered, I am. He said, bring it near to me that I may eat of my son's game and bless you. He brought it near and he ate. He brought him wine and he drank. And then he said, come near me and kiss me, my son. I want to pass this along. A blessing. I think we still should be in the business of blessing our kids. In the name of the Lord. We should be those. Look what Isaac does. The blessing, first there was a meaningful touch. Come here. Let me hug you. Let me kiss you. Let me touch you. There was a meaningful touch. And the first part of the blessing was something meaningful, something tender, some affection there. When they brought the kids to Jesus, what did he do? He hugged them. He loved on them. There was affection. That's where the blessing came. So verse 27, he came near and he kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and the goat hair. And he said, see, the smell of my son is the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. Do you know what that means? You know what a field that the Lord has blessed? Lots of manure. That's what I say when I drive through West Texas. Smells like money. Yeah. Look, he told him something about himself. He told Esau something about himself. So the second part includes a spoken message of evaluation. This is what I see in you. Think about that. Many kids have never heard their parents' perception of them. They've only heard what you don't like or what you think you should do, most of the time. But when it comes to the biblical blessing, there's that tender touch, that meaningful touch. And let me tell you what I see in you. You are a creative person. You are someone that people are drawn to. I love that about you, son. I love that about you, that you make people laugh. So many kids have never heard things like that from their father or from their parents. And man, that feels good. And then in verse 28, this is what Isaac says. May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be the Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. Do you remember where that line comes from? Genesis 12, when God tells Abraham, everyone who blesses you shall be, and everyone who curses you. So this blessing is generational. It's coming down. Third part is there's a meaningful touch. There's a message of evaluation. There's an impartation of a word of destination. Our kids and grandkids need to hear not only what we see in them presently, but what we see ahead for them. You're going to do well in life. You're going to make a difference in this world. The giftings God has given you are so unique and precious. You're going to impact so many people's lives. Don't you think that you would have loved to heard something like that as a kid? And if you did, you are blessed. And don't you think your kids would love to hear something like that, even as an adult? If my mom or if my dad was still around, if to call me and say something like that would mean the world to me. Look at verse 30. As soon as Isaac finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from hunting. He also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me." His father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" He answered, "I'm your son, your firstborn, Esau." Then Isaac trembled very violently. And he said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed." And as soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing." Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob, heel snatcher, trickster? For he has cheated me these 2 times. When was the first time? Sell me your birthright for what? Bowl of beans. Second time, cheated him out of the blessing. He took away my birthright, now he's taken away my blessing. Then he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing from me?" And Isaac answered and said to Esau, "Behold, I've made him lord over you and all his brothers. I've given to him for servants with grain and wine. I have sustained him. What can I do for you, my son?" Which brings us to the last part of a blessing. Continued commitment. I said what I said, and I mean it. Son, you may not see. Daughter, you may not see what I see in you right now, but I stick to it. I'm telling you, you are those things. You are great that way. You are lovely that way. You will make an impact. I believe it. I trust it. And in verse 38, Esau says to his father, "Have you but one blessing, my father?" This is getting pitiful, right? I'm feeling bad for the guy. "Bless me, even me also, O my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and he wept. And then Isaac and his father answered him and said, "Behold, away from the fatness of this earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck." Oh, wow. You know, from Esau comes a group of people that will be called the Edomites. The Edomites will be some of the greatest enemies that Israel will ever know. Israel will come from Jacob. And the Edomites will fight against Jacob and Israel all the days of their life. They will be wiped out as a people. And in the book of Obadiah, God says, "I wage war against the Edomites." Why? Why would God do that? Because from the Edomites, there's a man named Haman. If you remember him from the story of Esther. He's an Edomite. And what does he want to do? Kill the Jewish people. That's what he wants to do. He wants to annihilate them. Around 3000 BC, a group of called the Nabateans took control of the area where the Edomites lived. They took over the land of the Edomites. They mixed with the Edomites, and they became known as a group called the Idumeans. Now you take that and $5 and go to Starbucks, okay? The Idumeans brought forth from the Edomites, and from the Idumeans came a man named Herod. Herod the Idumean, who would kill the babies when Jesus was born. Around 47 BC, Julius Caesar appointed a man named Antipater. Antipater was also, guess what? An Idumean, from a descendant from the Edomites, a governor who wanted to wipe out the Jewish people. Now, I may be getting way in the weeds right here, but I'm over time too. I'm so sorry. Hang in there. This is really neat, I think. The Antichrist. Get your tinfoil hats out. Look, I get it. When it comes to Bible prophecy stuff, who knows what? But this is what we do know. According to Daniel 8, verses 3 through 9, and verses 20 through 24, same chapter. They said that the man who is the little horn, the one who is to be the Antichrist, has Greek ancestry. He says he's from the people who Alexander the Great would come from. Look, you can double check me. I'm trying to do this in record time. So go back, check me out. We can talk about it. We'll have fun at parties. Now, according to Daniel 9:26, he says that the Antichrist will be of the nationality of those who killed Christ. Who was the nationality of those? You had the Romans or the Jews, right? Which brings me to the next part. It says that in Daniel 11, 36 and 37, that he will not regard the God of his fathers. That phrase is reserved for Jewish people alone. So, what am I trying to say? Is it possible an Idumean, an Edomite, that will come against Israel at the last days? We saw it all through history. Could it be possible that that is the last days, the figurehead that will be the one that comes against Israel harder and harsher than anyone before? Could it be an Edomite, an Idumean? Possibly. I don't know. I'll throw that out there for you to have fun with. Play around with it. See what happens. Very well could be an Idumean. God is not capricious or unfair when you read the Bible and he says, Jacob I loved, Esau I have hated. It's not being capricious. What is this saying? This is a Jewish poetic form, a Hebrew poetic form to say this is the man that I chose. And this man is so far not the man that I chose. That's what that's saying. And I think that's what you see throughout history with the people groups of Esau and the people groups of Jacob. Let's skip down to the very end here, verse 46. Rebekah says to Isaac, I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? So what happens here, what we skipped over, Esau says, I'm going to kill Jacob. Mama, Rebekah, says, Jacob, run. He's a hunter and he's good at it. Go. Where do I go, Mama? Where do I run to? Go to your uncle Laban's house. You remember Laban? He's a bigger crook than Jacob ever was. Right? And we're going to see that. So what appears to be Mama wanting him to run away for just a little bit is going to turn into Jacob being gone for over 20 some odd years. But we'll see all of that next week. Let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for your word. Thank you for how you teach us. Thank you for how you illuminate Scripture to us, Lord. Let us be attentive to the words that you speak. Let us not be in that way that Isaac was in the tent that day when he trusted what he could see and feel and not the word that he heard. Help us to hear your word, to trust it, put it into practice. Keep us safe as we head home, and we thank you for all you do for us, Lord. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.